Okay, so in the last video, we sort of connected Meteor and Apollo using an auth link that we created using Apollo's Apollo link package. Okay, and we did this all, and it only took a few lines of code. It's a little confusing code here if you don't know the intricacies of Apollo link. Go ahead and head to Apollo's docs to read a little bit more about that. And what we want to do now is actually make use of this. For instance, we showed here that in our resolvers file, we now have access to the user ID as well as the entire user object simply by heading into the context object that is passed into all of your resolvers as well as mutations, any of that stuff. And then we said, hey, not only just log out this user ID, but give me all of the resolutions that are saved with a user ID as the same as this. Now, obviously, nothing worked there because, well, there's no resolutions attributed to that particular user. Also, right now I'm seeing this login button is below the submit button. This is all sort of a mess. I'm going to need to take some time to do some CSSing here. Let's actually move this above here. I'm going to move it all the way up to the top here just to keep it away from the resolution form. Okay, so just sort of ignore the sort of bare bones design here for now. We'll make that better, don't worry. And what we have here is simply just a submit button. What we want to do is we want to attach each resolution that's saved or mutated here to a particular user. Again, I mentioned that we have access to the entire user object as well as the user ID via context. And if you remember, we have context available to us in our mutation. So if we want to say, hey, give me the user ID from context, and next time we insert a resolution with a name, go ahead and insert it with a user ID as well. What this is going to do is it's going to attach the user ID to the object we stored in the database, and when we go to find it, well, we should be seeing all of the resolutions saved to by this specific user. So now let's go ahead and add a new resolution, which is going to be do hand stands more. Enter, submit, and you could see it popped up. What's going to be great about this is, well, if we click log out here, now we've refreshed the page, you can see that do handstands more does not show up, but do handstands does. If I click login user, incorrect password, okay, change the password, login user, refresh this page, it's only going to show my current resolutions. So just like that, we've now added some sort of user authentication. We're saving data to that specific user. But one thing you might be noticing here is some extreme annoyance. We click login and log out and the data here doesn't refetch, which is super annoying, right? Because who wants that? That doesn't make any sort of sense in any sort of practical application. So one thing we want to do is we want to be able to tell Apollo that something major has changed in this application. And you know what? Because something major has changed, you should be refetching all of the data, not refetching one query. You should be refetching the entire store. Because let's say you are a user and you've logged into an upgraded account, such as a Level Up Pro account. You now want to get access to all of those premium tutorials on leveluptutorials.com because let's face it, who wouldn't? And we want to be able to actually give you that authentication now. So we want to reset all of the stores. We want to reset all of the queries, all of that data. So how do we do that? Well, it comes through a method called resetStore, and that comes to us via Apollo. Well, we can have access to that with a higher order component called with Apollo that we can import directly from Apollo or it's from React Apollo. So if we head to our login form component and we want to import, and then inside of an object here with Apollo, we can import with Apollo from React-Apollo. Now, in my own work, I use decorators quite frequently, and we haven't set up decorators inside of this project, and I'm not going to, but if we were, you could simply just have this up top here and say with Apollo, and then have access to everything. But since this project isn't set up yet to use decorators, if you know how to, you can do that. We're going to simply need to output this login form the same way we have been with our GraphQL, by doing an export default, and we want to wrap our component inside of with Apollo. And inside of here, I think it was just login form, okay? So we're going to export default with Apollo, and we're passing in login form to with Apollo. This is going to give us access to some variables, or some props, I should say. If we head to our React Dev Tools and we check out our login form, if I can get these windows squared away, do login form, select this, you can now see we have access to a prop called client. Inside of client is going to be some stuff, of which there's really only one thing that we're super interested in, which is going to be resetStore, which is a method that, as it says, is going to entirely reset the store. Now, you might be thinking, hey, why are we putting with Apollo on login form if we need access to it within registration form as well as an app? And that would be a good question. So I know we just did this. Let's go ahead and move with Apollo from login form and put it into the app itself. Like here with Apollo, head over to, again, our login form. If you're into copying and pasting, you can copy and paste this right out of here. Again, let's export default class login form. Okay, so and you'll notice we had our GraphQL query in here. Now we can simply just wrap our app in with Apollo just like this, and we'll now have access to the client property within our actual app.js. And we can pass that client property down to all of our components. So again, with Apollo, what this does is it gives us access to a bunch of stuff. The reason I wanted to show you this is really just because sometimes the Apollo refetch and all that stuff, well, you want to have it happen globally, just like we do now. And to do so, you'll want to use this Apollo client. Okay, so on our app, we are now getting access to client, which is going to, again, have the resetStore method on it. And so let's go ahead and actually throw that in here. So a couple of things. Let's bring this in as client. So we had our button on click where we had a Meteor logout. So what we want to do here is turn this into more of an actual function here, and we'll say, hey, run Meteor logout first, but after you run the logout, we're going to do client.resetStore. Okay, like that. Watch Prettier do its thing. Okay, now the next thing we want to do is pass in a client to our register form as client, again, client equals client to the registration form and the login form. Well, again, what we're going to be doing here is essentially resetting the store anytime anyone logs in or out. Let's head into our register form. Now we want to head to our accounts.createUser. Here we had a callback where we were checking for errors, and we could say if there is no error, then run this.props.client.resetStore. Now you could pass resetStore in here just as itself, but this works fine with me. Okay, copy this line here. So if there's no errors, we're going to run this.props.client.resetStore, head into our login form.js, and the same exact thing. If no error, then run the login or the resetStore. So we now have resetStore firing in 3 different ways. It can fire on the logout, it can fire on the register, and it can fire on the login. And what resetStore should do is reset all of our stores. So let's see this in action here. As you can tell, I'm logged in because it says do handstands more. I'm going to click the logout button, and just like that, our store is refreshed and all of our stuff is here. We can click login, and now, and of course it didn't reset because I had an incorrect password for like the 500th time here, and we can click login. Again, incorrect password, sorry about that, password. And once I click login, you can see it immediately resets our store. Okay, so we've done quite a few things in these past couple of videos. We've made Apollo aware of Meteor's login system. We have, in our resolvers, learned about context, where we now have access to the user as well as the user ID. We can use those in all of our finds. We can use those in all of our inserts. And soon we're going to be using those to help pull in the current user data in a query as well. And lastly, we learned about the resetStore, which is available to us through with Apollo. Now with client.resetStore, it's going to reset your entire store and should probably only be used in cases where the entire store, whether it's things that are secure or not secure, whatever, it needs to be reset, such as logging a user in. So we used client.resetStore inside of our logout as well as our login and our registration. Now in the next couple of videos, what we're going to be doing is making this interface quite a bit nicer, right? Like the login button should not show up if a user's logged in, as well as these register and login buttons. So we're going to start writing our GraphQL stuff for our user itself, where we can then query and get access to our user data through GraphQL on the front end, rather than having to rely on some Meteor stuff like having to type in meteor.userid in the command line here. Cool. So that is a lot of stuff. As always, this is Scott with Level Up Tutorials. If you want to help support Level Up Tutorials, then head on over to leveluptutorials.com and sign up to become a Level Up Pro. It's a premium tutorial experience with new tutorials added every single month. You can see modern CSS layouts, React and Redux, and let me tell you, there's going to be a ton of GraphQL content this year, with and without Meteor, with React Native, with all sorts of cool stuff. So if you're interested in learning more about GraphQL, head on over to leveluptutorials.com and sign up to be a pro and help support this content. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.